Awesome. Well, let's dive into it, man. I'm excited to have you on.
Awesome.
I'm excited to get to know you properly. I've been on a podcast that you were doing, but we haven't really got to know each other much. I'd love to know more about your journey. I know that you've got quite a fascinating journey yourself in your process of grappling with God and grappling with your faith. And so, yeah. Let's dive in. I mean, if you want to, do you want to give like a kind of overview of maybe like who you are, what you're about, and then we can kind of maybe jump back and forward and bounce around.
Sure. You want me to do that now, or do you want to ask?
Yeah, go for it. Let's do it. No, that was me asking as good as I'll ask.
Oh,
so
okay. Yeah. Well,
don't expect high production value from me, Jay.
Okay. Wasn't sure how you guys edit this stuff up, or you edit up this stuff. I don't know. My name's Jay Bakker, son of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, who were televangelists in the United States in the 1980s. Probably the biggest, definitely had the biggest scandal in the 80s. But I grew up famous preacher's son, and mostly in front of the camera until the scandal in 1987 when my parents had a big scandal and everything fell apart. Much later, my dad went to prison. Jump way a few more years ahead of time. I started a church with some friends of mine called Revolution. And we originally started that because we felt that there wasn't a place for punk rock and hippie kids to go to church. And so we started it in an old bar. But it was very evangelical when we began. And, but I've been doing that now for 26 years. I've authored 3 books. My theology is always in change, always shifting. It's never quite ever arrives as far as I've found. So
do you have that awkward thing where if you read through the 3 books, you can kind of like slowly see like how by the 3rd book, you wouldn't even like the first book sort of thing? Not quite that bad.
The first book is, if I could redo it, I would definitely edit out some stuff. Even the second book, there's some stuff that I would probably pull out, especially in the first part of it. But my 3rd book, I'm pretty happy with. But
cool.
It's just always, that's the great thing about writing is, you kind of also as a time and place. And it's weird to see what that book means to which one means particular things to particular people, because you can kind of always tell where they're at when they're like, oh, like if they read my first book, I'm like, oh, okay, well,
don't get too close.
Yeah. So
I'm always like that with someone's like, I found a blog you wrote and I love it, and I'm like, dude, that blog is like 11 years old. You are gonna hate me. Run.
Yeah.
That's funny. Awesome. So you've done a bit of authoring. So what is that something you're still working on? Are you still putting out books, or is that something you did a while back? Or
it's probably been about 10 years since my last book. I have a couple ideas for books. But in the past few years, I went through a really tough divorce. Had kids, and now we have COVID. So there's about 2 or 3 more books I'd like to work on in the near future. So we'll see.
Right.
It's just, they're not handing out book contracts right now. So
yeah. Life is different right now. That's for sure. It's a bit crazy and different. So, I mean, I'm fascinated. You grew up in, like the definition of like Christianity on the big stage, like televangelist kid, like you were probably exposed to anything and everything and all sorts of ins and outs of what it was like to grow up in the Christian world. I speak to a lot of pastors' kids on here, but it's a whole nother level when your pastor kid is like big, everyone knows them. It's not just this town knows them or whatever. What was that like for you?
Well, growing up, it was all I knew until I was, 11 years old. And actually those years of the scandal, which probably lasted into the early 90s, my parents were on the news, on the cover of every gossip magazine, Saturday Night Live skits. The world was there. I'm grateful that there wasn't social media, to be honest with you, but they did their best to make up for it. because it was everywhere. But yeah, it was really strange. It was living under a microscope, and and the trauma that I went through at 11, and then again at 13 when my father went to prison. My mind and soul were not ready to go through. So it definitely shaped and shifted who I would become, and who I am now. But yeah, it was surreal. I mean, I had to have bodyguards. Wow. I had to have people there to protect me, and it was and then the scandal, we lose everything, and then I'm kind of in school with no protection, no bodyguards, no one looking out for me. So all of a sudden, my teachers don't work for my parents now. It was like, it was a different world. It was a completely different world, and wow. It was a huge shift for me. But I mean, maybe that's why shifts are a little bit easier for me in my theology nowadays, because of that.
Yeah, I do wonder that sometimes, of like, certain people seem to cope better with changing their theology, their worldviews, their psychological kind of outlook. And I do wonder what causes that. Is it a personality type thing? Is it your social construct growing up and things like that? It's interesting to think about stuff like that. Because it really is a lot to be going through. It's a lot to go through as an adult, right? I mean, like, I'm sure like just going through that as your parents or whatever was probably enough. But as a kid who understands things so much less and like has just not really, I mean, you don't have a fully developed brain, never mind a fully developed kind of understanding of the world. If any of us have that one, I mean, that's crazy.
And my sister was a teenager, and so she experienced it completely different than I did. You know what I mean? It's really strange to see kind of, how my dad survived it, how my mom had survived it, how I did, and how my sister did. I mean, it definitely impacted us all differently.
Wow. Yeah. So what was your education like? Was it a very kind of like education within a kind of Christian bubble? Like, were you homeschooled as you're traveling and stuff? Or
my parents had a Christian school. I mean, Heritage USA and the PTL television network were two things. And Heritage USA was like this place where they had hotels and a water park and television studios and private school. And so I attended that private school. Right. Until I was 11 years old, and it was a Christian school. It was I think they called it ACE. It was the Christian curriculum, and or PACE maybe. But yeah, they so it was a Christian. It was a lot of things. It was a lot of the same stuff that people do at homeschool, right? But it was in a school setting. So we had dividers, in between each student and everything. It was really bizarre. The last year they changed it to another curriculum. And then all of a sudden the dividers were gone and you were sitting in a regular classroom. So it was really, my education was really screwy, because then when my parents went through everything, my education wasn't the priority. And I tried going to a Christian school after my parents' scandal. And, it was like the teachers had an opinion about who my parents were, either good or bad, and that was reflective on how they treated me. And I was a hurt kid going through a lot. So yeah, my education really suffered through that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so I'm a pastor's kid, so I get it, what it's like for like people in your local community to either love you or hate you because they know the pastor, they've got an opinion about Christianity or whatever. But in some senses, that's easier just as people outside of Christianity judging the pastor's kid or the Christian or whatever. Like, there's a very clear divide there. And also, in some ways, people outside the church are nicer. Yes, so that's terrible. Yes. But like, Christians are mean. And so like, I've come across people that are like, that Benny Hinn or that, as soon as it's a big person, that Bill Johnson, that Benny Hinn, that whatever your celebrity Christian is, people have an opinion. I mean, they have an opinion. Absolutely love them, but and
that's true. I mean, it's and it can be disturbing both sides. There's some people, who just think my lineage is pure, can do no wrong, which is kind of weird and not healthy. And then there's, my Christian school I was in the year after we moved was a Baptist, and we were Assemblies of God. Wow. And the Assemblies of God and Baptists disagree on a few things, like speaking in tongues and eternal salvation, free will, predestination. And so, there you could feel that. You could feel that vibe. And now that my parents had failed, it was kind of like, see, these AGers got what they deserved. So yeah, Christians were probably the worst people through all that. They were really, really harsh. Them and a lot of probably super liberal people in the media who thought they were doing a world a favor by tearing my family apart. So scapegoating is something that I don't feel comfortable with to this day. Like I don't scapegoat any group, because I know what it feels like to go through that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that for sure. Like, it fascinates me. I mean, again, like people like pastors' kids, you kind of live in a bit of a bubble, but I guess a lot of them end up getting schooled outside of the Christian bubble or something like that. And it kind of suddenly exposes them to something. And you see a lot of pushback. I mean, I guess that's just classic kind of kids growing up, start to rebel against their family, but it feels like there's not much room for rebelling against your family, or at least being exposed to ways to rebel against your family. If you're grown up in this bubble, I mean, you're the Christian schools like basically run by your parents. I mean, like where do you go to rebel against your parents almost? Like, did you feel like content in that world? Like, was there kind of a big pushback at some point?
I didn't really feel content. Because I had a learning disability. I have dyslexia. I have severe dyslexia. So if you notice in my books, all the books I've written will say with someone, because I always do it with other people. And I never use a ghost writer with me because I want people who have dyslexia to know that they can write books too. I think it's extremely important. Like you can work with people and sometimes come out with a better product than if you did it on your own. It's really great if you get the right person to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, that was hard because I think a lot of the teachers who worked for my family were afraid to discipline me, or were afraid to say like, maybe he has a learning disability or things like that. And so it went undiagnosed until I got into public school. And then public school was like, there's something going on here, and caught it. So you get actually better education in public school than you do most private schools if you have any type of learning disability. So that was tough. I was overweight as a little kid. And so I was a target because people already like knew who my parents were, or they were jealous of my family or whatever it was. The kids can be cruel to fat kids. Oh, yeah. And so, I'm extremely introverted, and I think that developed over that time. I was more happy at home playing with G.I. Joes and Star Wars figures than I was, socializing with other people. I had my friends, but just a very few. So, and then after that, it kind of stayed the same as where I had a very few. I've always had just one or two really very close friends, and gone from there. So, I mean, it's just so different from age 11 and then 12 to, 16. I was public schools. And so tried to go back to a private school. That didn't work out, so it's been a weird journey, because there's being a PK and then there's being a fallen PK, PK of fallen evangelists. And you see it just as a different side of people. You end up getting empathy for people that you never thought you'd have it for. And a lot of times when churches fall or people make mistakes, you have a lot more grace for those people than, you realize there's a genuineness to it. Like I'll pick on you for a second. I think it was you who had a thing of a fallen pastor on Instagram, and then 10 minutes later he's taking it off and he's not sad anymore. That's not true. He's a human. Those are human beings.
Of course.
They hurt too, unless they suffer from some sort of delusional type of problem, then they don't. But, these are people that are also under extremes amounts of pressure to be perfect. And if we know anything about humanity, no one can be perfect. And so I don't think it's an act. I think it's just people are in over their head. I mean, most of these preachers don't start off to become mega preachers. My parents started off to become puppeteers in children's church, and just over time, all of a sudden that was on TV and they became popular. And then my dad started hosting this other show. I mean, it just kind of grew over time, into this huge church where everybody, it wasn't like one day I'm going to have 10 million people who've watched my show. It happens over time. And so I think it's easy to other people. It's very easy to other the church. And I think even especially going through deconstruction and things like that, it's very easy to have a lot of anger towards them, a lot of hurt towards them. And what we don't realize is a lot of the way they respond is out of their own insecurities. Absolutely. they're afraid. They don't know either, and they might have some of the same questions. They might not even believe in God anymore, but they've built their whole life on that foundation.
Yep.
And then they see somebody else doing what they want to do, and it scares them. So it's really, really a complicated thing. So yeah, I have grace for everybody, and that's what I'm kind of grateful for going through. That is that, I want to sit down and talk to everybody. I want to work out problems and have hard conversations. I want to argue well, but do it in a way that's productive.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. So.
Makes huge amounts of sense. At the very end of the day, these issues are all systemic issues. Everyone is suffering from systemic issues that, someone built at some point, but like you said, no one built these things with the intention for them to become terrible systems. No one sat down and thought, how will we make a terrible system out of this? The early church wasn't sitting there going, well, this is pretty good what Jesus set up, but how do we make it really corrupt?
Right.
That's not what's going down.
I think about even my dad, had a volunteer doing it, started off with a volunteer doing their finances, and then becomes this multi-million-dollar ministry. And all he does is hire that person rather than vent people to come and watch over what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, it's kind of a capitalism in the American dream is why we often see it just crumble, is because, some things take off and people don't know what they're doing.
Sure. I mean, that's, how many people in just the business world get promoted beyond where they're supposed to be, and that happens, or they're really successful in one area and yet they have to do something else that they're really not successful at, and they really should be outsourcing at this point, but whatever. Yeah. No, absolutely. And, you talk about pastors. I mean, a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes of what I do. I mean, 98% of what I do is behind the scenes, but I talk to dozens of pastors a week, probably a lot more, but sometimes up to 100 pastors a week. Sometimes I talk to a lot of pastors, because here's the thing. The data on deconstruction is that people that de-church and deconstruct are more educated in their faith, they're more involved in their faith, and they're usually higher up in leadership and volunteering roles within church. What does that suggest? There's going to be a lot of pastors out there.
Yeah.
They are the top of that game. They're paid full time to educate themselves in their faith, to be involved in the church, to whatever. And so what's really crazy is you see so many pastors that are going through this, and yet they're in a system that doesn't allow them to do it, and they are utterly trapped. It's a painful thing. And there's all kinds of different dynamics. And of course, there's more narcissists in pastoring roles than in other parts of the church. And so, of course, there's some narcissistic people that do some really stupid stuff and maybe do have issues and whatever. But even they, on some level, are a victim to this system.
Even if if it's genuine narcissism, medically, then they have no control over it anyway. I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's, we want them to take responsibility, but you might want to read a book on psychiatry before you see how far you can go.
Everyone is ultimately, even if you've slowly developed that over years, it's still a thing that you can't get out of, right? You can't just switch the switch and turn it off.
And it's sad. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing because it's also takes a village to build that type of architecture. Usually, real narcissists are usually something from their childhood, but people who've kind of learned that type of behavior, it's happened over time from having people who say, yes. I mean, my dad used to say that, he said, just one day you wake up and no one disagrees with you. Because I would ask him sometimes when I was younger, I was like, preacher, why would you end up wearing a white suit, Dad, or something like that? And he's like, it sounds silly, but he's like, you just get around people who just keep saying yes, that you just lose touch with reality, and it's important to have friends who will push back and tell you the truth. It's invaluable. You need some people to give you shit
when you pull up with a full-blown white suit, custom tailored, and they're like, "Dude, kind of look like an idiot."
That's why my best friend's Irish. Yeah.
I love it. But I think I can't even imagine how fucked up I'd be if everyone agreed with every idea I ever had. Gosh, I would be a mess. I need constant criticism and pushback, and
you would just get to a place where you're stagnant, and you think every thought you have is the Holy Spirit or something,
Yeah, well, and there's plenty of those out there as well, so that makes sense. And I think that's part of the frustration. So many people in the deconstruction kind of, as they deconstruct, they are so frustrated, so angry, so, enraged by the system, by the people in the system even, because it's very hard to distinguish between the two. Until you become a bit more nuanced, it's really hard to do that. It's really hard to distinguish between your senator and the Republican Party, or, whatever, or the Republican Party and right-wing politics as a general kind of theme or theory, or right-wing politics and right-wing economics. There's this nuance to these things, right? But I think one of the things that really people are railing against is themselves, because we forget that the person that we're upset with, the group of people that we're upset with, that was me 4 weeks ago, 8 years ago, whatever it was, right? And I think that's part of it. I think there's a shame. I think there's regret. There's all sorts of emotions that are tied to these people caused me to waste my time, or I feel really guilty about how I treated gay people in this group. And so now I'm going to lash out at how they're still treating gay people. Even though that wasn't what helped me get out of that situation, right? Probably, maybe.
Well, I think a good example of that was when the guy who wrote "I Kissed Dating Goodbye" came out and denounced
Joshua Harris.
Joshua Harris came out and denounced his book, and people were like, "It's too late. You can't do this." Blah blah blah. And he basically came out. I think he denounced his faith as well. I'm not completely sure about that, but said something to those lines.
Sure.
And people were really angry at him. And I was just, in my mind, I'm always thinking about how do we build community, and being really angry at somebody and telling them when they ask for forgiveness and saying no is not how you build community at all.
That's not how you build a good friendship, right?
And in any world, it doesn't have to be a Christian world or anything. But, people really railed on him about it. And then what I was surprised was it was a lot of progressives who did it as well. And I was like, so now the conservatives are being like, we love that book. How dare you? And the other guys are like, how dare you? We hated that book, But for me, the irony is like, well, either you bought that book or someone bought that book for you and you took time to read that book, And for me, I can remember being a pastor at the time, 20 something pastor going like telling all my kids and people listening online, like, don't read this book. You should go on dates. You know what I mean? So I'm like, it wasn't like there wasn't, you can't just blame him. You turned the pages, even if your parents gave it to you, be mad at your parents. He screwed up too, but he was 22, 23.
Oh, he was a product. Talk about products of the system, right? He was literally a child. I mean, he was so young. Like I think he'd just come out of his teens. He was like 20, 21. And like, he was a product of the moral majority, the purity movement, all these kind of people that were wanting that particular message kind of perfectly tailored. They found a great kind of poster child, supported it, published the book, and gosh, no wonder. And it is interesting. And I think this is the problem with, these kind of like dualistic concepts of like left, right, conservative, progressive. Generally speaking, they're just as dualistic as the other, and they need an other to belong to their group. And so, on one side, you see people going, we hate Josh Harris because he was one of us, and now we don't know what to do because he's not. Clearly, he's broke this like rule we have of like, we agree with your book. But the other side is going, we aren't happy with Josh Harris because we're supposed to be not happy with Josh Harris, and now he's agreeing with us. Right. And it's like, where's our identity in hating this movement? Now, the thing is, if they just disassociated that systemic belief and structure from the person that said, hi, I'm coming out, they'd have a warrior on their side on one level, right? And it would be something that would be, come on board. Like, there is a way that you could do that and still fight against the system. Yeah. But the lack of nuance to distinguish between the person and the message is
I think that's
troubling.
I learned from nonviolence and from Martin Luther King's work, to create a movement of nonviolence, was the idea is that your enemy is always a victim of misinformation, not the person itself. And so, if a person asks for forgiveness, changes their mind, repents, then that person is brought in. We try to work with that person, understand it, educate that person, and that's how the movement grows. Is you're trying to convince, convince that no, dating is not a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like, Or racism is a bad thing. And someone goes, oh, I think racism's bad. And I don't think you'd ever hear MLK Jr. be like, oh, I'm sorry, that was too late. You should have figured that out, years ago when we first started, to anybody. I think if Bull Connor would have come crying to him, he would have been like, come on, man, march with us, So that's, nonviolence has played a big role in my life as well with those type of things. Is we want people to change. When I was working with Soul Force for LGBTQ rights, we were meeting with these huge mega pastors with the hope that they would change their mind, and the last thing we'd want to do is if they said change their mind, being like, too late, so to me, it's, I don't know, seems like common sense, but it's also because I've read so many books about it and lived through it. So I can't take it as common sense. I have to take it as something that I've learned through life experience.
Yeah. And I think it isn't common sense until it is, you know what I mean? It really is so counterintuitive when we view the world in such black and white, in, out, right, wrong, left, right. Like it's so hard for me to look across the table and not try and build a case, an argument, trying to, make sure that person is in their box so I feel good in my box. Like, it's so hard to break out of that. And the reason I know that is because I've done it for decades. I did it for the first couple of decades and a half of my life. That's how I thought and
the hurt and pain of others either, too, at the same time, because often their pain and anger are towards, Jim Bakker or this person or that person. And as they're dealing with stuff, you don't want to be like, well, no, they're human beings, so you have to forgive them. Your anger's worthless, so you also have to, walk that line too, and talk it out. And I think that's why having tough conversations are pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this it's an interesting line I try and walk, but generally speaking, I'd say about 50% of my memes are pointing fun at a group of people. Usually I'm trying to point a picture of the system, the group, the structure, not individuals in it. Like, so I'm not calling it like, look at whoever, like that guy, you look at Jay Bakker, what an idiot or whatever. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to go, hey, have you noticed this about progressive Christianity? Oof. Have you noticed this about evangelicals? Or, and generally speaking, what I'm appealing to, because it's kind of marketing 101. I don't overly think of it as marketing, but what I'm thinking is a huge portion of people that need to work with me and try to go through some form of deconstruction, to try and go beyond their dualism, to try and heal and grow and become all that they need to be and move forward in their spirituality, are sitting there scared, angry, alone, and someone having a laugh at their enemy is the best, funniest, most healing, most connecting thing. But it is a really fine line to draw. And at the end of the day, I have to just go, at the end of the day, if a few people that I point at that are part of a group take it too personally, get upset, that's okay. They're not my people. I'm not who I'm trying to reach. I've got so many people to reach anyway. I'll lose them and deal with it. But it's a tough dividing line.
I would push back on you a little bit on that.
Oh, and I appreciate it.
I think the power in what you're doing is that you don't have an agenda. And I think what you want to make sure is that you don't present certain things with an agenda, because I think there are people out there who you might think, well, they're not my people, but they are. They want to hear it. They read your stories. They look at your, they look at your stuff. I mean, before I knew who you were, I was looking at it, going through it, and recommending it to friends and people like that. And, I talk about it at church. But one of the things I think your power is in, and I'm not saying you need to stop doing anything or start doing anything necessarily, but what I'm just saying is I think it's that this idea is that it's not one group that's the enemy, or that there's a certain area that you want to get to, but it's letting people come and find out who they are, where they are, and how to deconstruct. And then you're like, okay, this is how you deconstruct, but where you end up is not, I don't really care. I just want you to be happy or live your best life,
move forward,
live well. Yeah, move forward. And so I think that's something that I think is important. Yeah. Is so there might be, you might have to walk a finer line. I don't know, but
I do, because I get messages constantly from people that are in that place going, every single day I get 3 or 4 messages saying, hey Phil, I don't really agree with where you're at, and I'm a conservative, I'm a Baptist, I'm a whatever, AOG
Right.
pastor or whatever. But I really love some of the stuff you're bringing up. I'm asking some of the same questions. And so I'm here, and sometimes it stings a little, but actually I welcome it, and I'm interested.
Yeah.
And so I am so aware. And as I'm creating a thing, I'm like, oh, how would that person that messaged me yesterday read this or whatever?
Right.
But yeah, I still flop. Like I would say probably about like 70% of the time I'm going to hurt a bunch of people probably. But I think you can craft the most enlightened, beautiful message in the world and piss off half the world anyway.
Piss off. Oh yeah. No, I mean, that's my story of my life, man.
Absolutely.
You know,
so going back to your
I'm
life,
really good at giving other people advice.
Oh yeah, well, aren't we all? That's what I'm fighting hard against. But I'm really intrigued. So you grew up in this world, like it seems to me being in this very heightened Christian world, kind of maybe resenting some of it, not being that excited about being in that world. Going through a hugely traumatic kind of like scandal, like seeing your dad go to prison, you know, all this stuff, all because they were serving God. Maybe they made some mistakes in that, but their goal, their vision, the tagline was still, you know, we're loving Jesus, you know?
Well, I mean, I could definitely say there was more good done than bad. You know, I mean, I saw people who, you know, have their homes built or fed or, you know, whatever. I mean, I saw they did so many things that, you know, that no one talked about. So, you know, there's all that we forget about as well.
So how do you go through all of that kind of extreme kind of experience of Christianity and still navigate? Like, it feels to me a lot of people would have walked away when things went south. That you would have just gone, you know what, this is not for me, or you know what, I'm not so sure about this. Or did you hold on to things the whole way through that? Did you? What was your faith like in those kind of early years?
There was part of me that was afraid of God. You know, there was also both my mom and dad both really always kind of made it clear is that we weren't, you know, that Jesus and God and, you know, and their opinions weren't the same as people, you know? So I didn't need to, you know, see that, like, you know, because they're angry with us doesn't mean God's angry with us, or because they're happy with us doesn't mean God's happy with us, you know? And so there was some of that helped, you know, knowing that I could separate the two. It was more like learning more about human nature right away. But I did have a lot of anger towards the church. Through my high school years, I kind of just ignored God altogether and just hung out with my friends. And it was probably the best thing I could do for myself. Did some therapy here and there. Every now and then had a church camp experience because for some reason, my mom made me go to church camp on the summer. But for the most part, you know, I was angry at the church. But I also thought that God must be a monster, but not a monster because of what happened to my parents. I was under the impression that God was like a rule keeper and a man in the sky keeping rules and wanting regulations. And so legalism was very real to me.
Yeah.
And I thought for some reason there must be something wrong with me because I couldn't obey these rules. And it wasn't necessarily things I was getting from my parents, strangely enough, because my parents never really shoved religion down my throat.
Okay.
Honestly. But the people that worked for them did, you know, the people who followed them did, the schools that my parents sent me to and the youth camps that my parents sent me to did. And so for me, I felt like that God was this unrealistic taskmaster. And so that was a really hard part. And I was mad at the church because I felt like there was this great amount of hypocrisy growing up in something where I heard so much about forgiveness, you know, and not see it. You know, and then hearing about restoration and not seeing it, you know. So for me, there was like this thing of like, something's not right here. You know, something doesn't seem to add up. But it took me probably till I was 19 or 20 to really be curious enough to look into it for myself.
Yeah. What was that caused that, do you think?
Caused me to look into it? Or
yeah, it caused you to kind of go, okay, maybe this is something I need to explore again, or...
Well, I actually had started this church revolution with a few friends, and we were in Arizona, and I got burnt out and I left. I just left and moved to Georgia with some friends. My dad was out of prison by this time. But I told him, I said, I can't do ministry anymore because I feel like God hates me. And my friend, Donnie Earl Polk, D.E. Polk is what he goes by now. He's a pastor. But he looked at me and said, you're trying to earn your salvation. You're trying to make it's so funny to think, like, I don't even think this way much anymore, but at the time, this is very radical for me to hear. He's like, you're trying to earn your salvation. There's no reason for Christ to die for you, and you're acting like you don't need forgiveness. And something struck true to me there. But at the same time, I was like, you know what? You're just trying to get away with your own sin, was my major thought for him. But I was like, I'll be your roommate anyway. You justify your sin how you want to. I'm just going to ignore God as long as I can. And I was also a heavy drinker at the time. And so I started to get sober, and I was just miserable. And one day I just came to him and I said, if this thing about grace that you keep telling me about is true, I said, prove it to me. And I really didn't know the Bible very well. I must have been 19, 20, probably 20 at this time. Didn't know the Bible very well. My parents never made me memorize it. And plus I had dyslexia, so I was awful at memorizing anything. And he said, well, read the book of Galatians. And then he said, read Corinthians. And so I started reading Paul, strangely enough. And it blew my mind. And I would call my dad sometimes late at night and be like, Dad, why didn't we ever talk about this? And I remember my dad saying, like, well, son, I know it, but he's like, it's so good. It just seems too good to be true. And here's one of the biggest televangelists to ever live telling me that he thought grace was too good to be true. And I'm like, well, that's right here. I'm like, I'm reading it, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, I'm like, this is pretty radical stuff. And I kind of compare it to maybe Batman, having that aha moment of like, oh, I'm going to fight crime. So I was like, I'm going to use grace to fight legalism and to fight the church, so I turned grace and I weaponized grace a little bit for the first few years of my ministry. Like, I'm going to make these people pay. And, but hopefully set them free at the same time. Who knows what I was thinking at the time, but yeah. So that grace thing got me really excited. And so I just started tearing the Bible apart, reading it, and then buying books. What are you reading in seminary? We're reading this. Okay. How can I get this book? I'll get the book. Oh, you're reading Greek and Hebrew. Okay. Well, where can I get books about Greek and Hebrew? Oh, you can get them here. Okay. Well, I'll go get those books. And, so I would just be sitting with all these books around me. Oh, well, the historical background and the culture of this society. How can I find out where that is? Well, I think it's in this book. Okay. I'm going to get that book. I heard that there were these particular gods that worshipped in Rome that caused people, it wasn't really about LGBTQ stuff. It was actually about these particular gods. You have something on that. Oh yeah, here's the pictures of those gods, and with statues. Oh, okay, yeah, I want to read that. And so for me, studying the Bible started off as deconstruction right away. It was deconstructing everything I'd ever heard growing up. And, but wanting to really get as close to what I was hoping when I thought there was like this ultimate truth that I could get to. And it's funny, though, how far you can go even as a literalist, because a lot of the time I was studying this stuff literally. And I would say I became gay affirming because of literalism, more or less. Like I was like, oh, you literally can't believe it's a sin if you take it within its context, within what was happening, into what the laws behind Rome were and all this stuff. So, I was like, now I would care less. I would just be like, it's wrong. I disagree with Paul. But I'm kind of glad I had that moment in time where I was just deconstructing everything, but deconstructing it with history and with Greek and with Hebrew and with all this, finding out what the root words were, and what does it actually mean to fear God? Does it mean to really fear God, or does it mean to reverence God? You know what I mean? And just finding out all these little bits, and it started to become good news. And as I got older, then I started to realize, like, oh, wow, the pastoral epistles don't belong in the Bible at all. They're probably forgeries. Just pure and simple, not Paul, and actually trying to clean up Paul's work. They're almost anti-Paulinian. And so then, discovering that and then being like, am I going to tell people about this discovery? And then, a week later, I'm like, well, hell yeah, I'm going to tell people about this.
Oh, wow.
I just dove right into it because and I remember sitting with, because I was lucky. I've been really lucky in my career to be able to go to universities and different things and talk with scholars and things like that. And And I remember one scholar was like, well, I know they really are that, but don't you think they still serve some use? And I was like, no, I don't. And this is why A, B, C, D, you know what I mean? And have those tough conversations. Here I am, a high school dropout, having discussions about, are these books belong in the canon or not? So yeah, it's that's how it, I just started taking things apart.
Yeah.
And trying to understand context and original language. And I became, for a long time, I used to collect Bible translations. I was obsessed with trying to find the right translation. So yeah, that's interesting. But the funny thing is, people are always like, study the Bible, read the Bible, read the Bible. And I would joke back then in my early career is like, you asked me to do that and then got mad at me for what I found out.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
that could be the tagline for deconstruction, right? I mean, like, people will frequently throw around the myth, oh, people that deconstruct didn't take their faith seriously, or were not committed enough, or didn't really understand the Bible. But 9 times out of 10, and I don't have the actual data on that. That's more anecdotal. Right. We're working on getting the actual data on that though. But there is a lot of data on de-churched people. And people that leave church, at least 9 times out of 10, easily know the church, know the Bible much better than the average person in a church. If you picked 100 people in church and 100 people that have left the church and said, tell me about this Bible verse, or where is this Bible verse, or what do you think it means about homosexuality?
I mean, you see it in seminary.
They're going to know more.
In seminary all the time. You see it in seminaries, people leaving the church in droves coming out of seminary.
Right.
And I don't even know if it's necessarily rejection of the religion in particular, as much as it is, this is how I was raised and told, and now I'm finding out this is not true. And so I've been lied to by the community I grew up in, and I can't do it, and I'm not going to go back into it. And for me, I never got stuck to a denomination or a body that said I had to think a certain way or act a certain way. Now I have board members, who I've had leave before or tell me I was going to hell or try to destroy the church. I've had that happen. But I also have good friends who push back, who question me and things like that as well. But yeah, but I've been able to say what I think. And part of that was probably out of an insecurity of not having the proper biblical education that most people do. So my strength has always been, I've relied a lot on being very transparent and very honest with people. I've had youth pastors fired went back then when I would go speak at churches a lot more. I had pastors literally fired because they had me come speak at their church.
Wow.
So it's quite a ride.
Yeah, I can empathize. I've had churches split over my visits and things like that. Yeah. So, and I was on my best behavior. I'm sure you were too, probably as well. Yeah. Maybe not. I don't know. But there's an element of reverence when you go to someone else's world and you're like, hey, where are you guys at? I'll try and nudge you along, but I want to be sensitive to where you're at, and then you're like, oh God, that was a bit of a hard nudge. Apparently, I didn't think it was, but
and I've actually had churches book me because they know I do that, because they're like, well, we know we can blame it on you.
Yes, we can get this message out, but we don't.
When I was affirming, I had some non-affirming churches come and have me come speak, and the staff was like, "We're all with you, but we don't know how that'll be handled, so we want to test it on you." I was like, "Fantastic, let's do it," But yeah, it's interesting. Awesome. When you see what's going on behind the scenes, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's that's what has given me. As a pastor's kid as well. But just traveling and speaking in hundreds of churches over the years, and you get to know these people, and there's so much in the way of problems in the system, and there's so many people that are very broken and unhealthy people that are pastors for sure, and doing some really harmful things. Not going to take that away, not going to minimize the pain and suffering they're causing, but a vast majority of them are doing a really good job within the framework and the worldview that they have. This is what to do. You could argue Westboro Baptist Church are doing that, right? Their whole framework is like, these people are going to burn in hell forever unless we go and pick at their funeral and convince them, or, whatever. It's warped and it's fucked up and it's wrong from my perspective, but it's the best. It genuinely is loving and kind in their
No, they picketed my mom's funeral. So I definitely,
of course. I guess you big enough profile. Wow, gosh. But it's the thing of like, that's the most extreme example I can think of, but how much more so can we think of like Pastor Jim of a church of 50 people in a rural town of like 800 people who is just trying to help people and doing hospital visits and just trying to help people feel like they have meaning in this world, that they have direction, that they're saved, they're going to heaven, like all these different things. Probably not the evil masterminds behind a Disney movie, you know, like
right. Well, that's the tough thing too, is because of social media. Now we can reach that guy because he decides to have a Twitter handle or something, right? And then he's destroyed online, you know, and not with a lot of healthy people who are wanting to have really good conversations. I mean, I have some conversations with people where I just either get their phone number or they give me their phone number if I think it's important to really go somewhere.
Just talk.
Rather than than to do it even in private online. Just like, let's just talk. Let's hear each other's voices. Let's hear the reflection. If we're near each other, let's have coffee, you know? But yeah, there are a lot of people. And that's the thing, is we're so quick to judge people as bad or evil or wrong, or we trade one legalism for another legalism, you know? And it's when I remember, I live in Seattle now, but my ex-wife is from Seattle. But when we were still married, we came up for a wedding, and Mark Driscoll's church had just kind of fallen apart. I think it was around this time. And we were up there, and I remember this guy coming up to me being like, you know, I used to believe what you believed. I went to Driscoll's church, and he's like, you know, and I don't believe that shit anymore. And I'm a lot happier than I've ever been. And I was like, I don't believe half of, or 90% of what Mark Driscoll said, you know what I mean, either. You know, I'm like, what do you think I believe? You know, and tried to have a conversation with him of like, you know, I get you're angry, you know, I would be too. But we both probably believe in two different things. You know, I mean, that's what I loved about going when I took classes in seminary just for kicks, is like, you're looking at like 10 different theologians who all believe 10 different things. And you're just like,
really different things. And they're all way smarter than all of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's not because of ignorance that they believe different things.
No, it's because they're brilliant, and you know, and they
looked into it too much.
Right. They looked into the abyss, and this is what they got, you know? So yeah, it's pretty, you know, so yeah, I mean, I understand anger, but at the same time, I also understand grace, and I understand healing, and that there's I think time for us all to heal and become better communicators with each other. And one of the things I'm trying to teach people to do is really argue well. So if you're already on the journey, you're going to go on the journey, or you've been there and done that, but you argue well and you don't write these people off, because you might be the person who changes these people. You know, like the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutherans, you know, they weren't always affirming of LGBTQ people, you know, and a lot of people left because of that. But a few gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender folks stayed in the church and pushed and made the difference to stay. And now they're affirming. They're the biggest, one of the biggest denominations in the United States. And they are, you know, you can be gay and be a Lutheran pastor, you know. And I remember when that happened, I actually spoke at their youth convention right before it happened. It was probably the only time I really held my tongue, because I knew they were all on such edge. But about that issue, because that issue I was very outspoken on. But to see that change, you know, so there has to be the people who aren't angry, aren't angry, or they're angry and they've put it in a way to say, well, I don't want other people to have to feel this anger or feel this pain or feel this hurt. I want to make a change. And so we need that, you know, we need people who can do that as well. And I believe everybody has that potential. I think it's if that's what they want to do with their life or not. And I'm not going to judge anybody for doing it or not doing it. You know what I mean? My thing is just, here's your options and here's what you can do. You can change people.
On that concept, I believe as well that everyone has the potential to get to the place where they can do that. But I do think there's a journey. And I also wonder as well, maybe you have thoughts on this, because I mean, and this is a great example. So, the Lutheran Church is not affirming gay, trans people, you know, bisexuals, asexuals, all sorts of different people in this movement are being very hurt, because they are not affirmed and not valued and not seen as, they're just not accepted as they are. That's a hard place to stay in and make the change. I agree that change is often more likely to happen from internal pressure than from external pressure. I think external pressure often does the job. Like, if enough people start causing you to lose your money or whatever, or I don't know. But generally speaking, it is going to work better from the inside. It is going to, or at least maybe it would quicker. But I think there's this dynamic of it's tough, right? You're asking people that are being hurt systemically. You know, they are victims of hate in some way, or of some sort of, victimization. I'm trying to think of the right words, but the danger is that we turn around and we go, oh, the reason this system isn't changing is because you gay people aren't doing it. But it's a church where 90% of the people in there, maybe much more, are straight, and maybe they should be doing it. Or, you know, it's the white church going, well, the reason it's not changing is because black people left and formed their own black churches. If black people came to our white churches, maybe we'd change. It's like, could you look in the mirror and say, maybe if I was less of an asshole right now, I'd probably change as well? Or it feels like there's a tension in that, right? Of
and that's
people that are going through that.
That's why they make movies about people like Martin Luther King, and books are written, and he has a statue in Washington. Right. It doesn't happen often.
It's not normal.
It's not normal. And the people who are outside of the Lutheran Church too played a part by saying, you know, we don't want that type of hate. This is what it is. And calling it what it is. And by sharing their anger and their hurt. You know what I mean? So everybody plays a part. And I think that's where you come in with what you're doing, is saying, you know, I don't have expectations on where you're going to arrive. And that's what I try to do as well. I think one of the things I'm trying to do, though, is because I am trying to change things, maybe not from the inside, but from somewhere. I'm trying to say, don't hate the people who decide to stay in the machine. You know what I mean? And I used to really give the people who stayed in the machine a hard time, to be honest with you. You know, like, oh, well, you're just keeping it going. You know, you're keeping the hate going. And what I realized is that, you know, maybe I was writing off the wrong people, and maybe I was just writing off people, period, was the wrong thing to do. And so that's, you know, kind of a lesson you learn. Everybody plays their own role. But it's hard to walk that line. But the job for me as a pastor is I just want everybody to kind of have a little bit of grace for each other and each other's callings, you know, and what's going on. And I don't expect anybody to be, you know, the next Martin Luther to reform the church, you know, but they might, and they can, and they have the capability to do that. I really do believe that. And, you know, I believe Luther was deconstructing as well. You know, rather than throwing a page of, you know, Galatians into the fire, he decided to read it. You know what I mean? And it did something to him, and he deconstructed. And what happened? You know, now we have more separation in churches, or we have, you know, a really great concept about grace. By no means anything perfect, but still, that you know, that's the thing.
Baby steps in the evolution, I guess.
But it's also why, like, I've been dropping your name lately to friends, is because I'm going, oh, great, I don't have to handle all this shit. You know, I know somewhere where you can go and work with somebody who knows a lot more about deconstruction than I do, and can help you out a lot more. So that, you know, so my job can be, oh, I'm going to come up with a talk on Sunday, and I'm going to encourage this, because, you know, this is where you need to be, or at least have this in your life right now, plus what we're doing, or even minus what we're doing. But here's a place to go to look into this. So that's, I'm a big proponent of helping people find where they need to go and not holding on to anybody. You know, it's not my thing.
That's beautiful. That's a huge thing. And I think it's a really important thing when I was on your podcast, we talked about this, the concept of kind of like stages of growth and how we psychologically develop, and how at certain stages you need certainty and safety and security, and you need an authority figure that kind of holds your hand and kind of gives you a bit of a, like, well, this is how to read the Bible. This is what God says, you know, like you need that for whatever reason. And now later on, you might look at that and go, that's abusive. That's controlling. That's whatever, you know, that's just letting yourself not thrive or whatever. And it's like, yes. But that's also what you want, right? That's what you psychologically are going, that's what I want right now. And it's realizing that I can stay in that system and help them move into the next step. But you know what I can't do if I stay in that system and help them move to the next step is move the people that move on. to the next step.
Right.
And so I now need to go, well, who's going to help those people that I help move on? Or I come across, someone comes to me and says, hey, Phil, what about this? And I'm like, dude, I can't talk about that here, or I can't do my work in here. Right. And that's when I worked in the church, when I worked with Bethel, when I traveled and spoke in very conservative churches that were charismatic, but very conservative. I had to keep a low profile in a lot of things I believed so I could help people move. But when they moved on, they were kind of like, oh, we don't really like Phil's stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't like my stuff, but this is where I'm at. And I think there's gotta be on some level this, like you said, we don't know where people are at. Maybe there's a pastor of a church doing that. And he's like working with super, non-affirming people. And he's like, okay, I can't come out and preach first Sunday of the church when I get knighted the pastor or whatever, whoever works in this denomination. I can't come out week 1 and go, all right, guys, we're affirming everyone, because that's going to be a shit show and everyone's going to walk away. And I've changed no one's mind. How do I do this step by step so I actually bring them forward? Now, if a gay person comes to my church, I think the responsibility for that pastor is then to go, dude, get the fuck out of here, right? Go. This is not a safe place for you.
I agree.
Come back in 8 years, but but surely that's better than going, okay, we're just going to jump to the goal and then all these people will walk away and find another fundamental place to bunker down in. Like, I need to see these people change.
And I'll be honest with you, I jumped. I did that. I mean, I became affirming over a few months of just really studying and talking with some pastor friends of mine. And it happened because I got invited to speak at Exodus, which was how to, what's it called? Reparative therapy. The reparative therapy. And so I was like, I've got to look into this more and more. And I came to the conclusion that I didn't think it was a sin. And so me just being as earnest as could be, I was like, I've got to tell everybody. And I remember telling my board first, and that's my board split. And we lost all of our donations. We had a huge, I think those 2 years, we probably made over $100,000 at our church a year. I've never seen that kind of money since. I spoke at every Christian, all these different Christian music festivals and all this stuff. And I did that sermon, and then within 24 hours of that sermon going online, this was probably 2006, I lost every speaking engagement I had. Wow. And within a month, I had to lay off my whole staff. So I know what it's like to just jump to that. Right. And I think for me, it worked, and I slept really well at night. But I definitely learned, what other pastors, what it takes for other pastors to get to that, why they don't, and it's different, right? For a pastor, for you, maybe if you're thinking of if you're thinking very personally, my inner world, I'm like, gosh, the weight off my shoulder, that'll be, and that's great. But then you're also weighing up I've got staff though, and I don't want to ruin their lives. So how do I balance that? I think when you're just an average Joe, like most of us, just going along to a church, you can maybe go, I'll be a part of this, I'll try and change. But you can also maybe go, this isn't good for my health right now. I might come back in 5 years to do this, but right now, I don't need this. Yeah. And I think you can definitely love people
that's okay.
from a distance. I think that's fine, not that you have to love everybody. I mean, I encourage everybody to try that. I think it's pretty cool when you can, but it also, I've had to live through a lot of hell to get to that point where I've realized it's almost harder for me not to than just because that's where I'm at. But it's taken me a lot of time to get there.
What's helped you get there? What's helped shift the what gets you to the point where you can go, okay, I can love ISIS, I can love Hitler, or these kind of extreme examples.
Even these extreme examples is like, I can love for them. I don't know what to do for them. I can not like them and still love them at the same time, and not approve of what they're doing and still love them at the same time. It's not hate the sinner or hate the sin, love the sinner. Is not what I'm trying to do. But what I'm trying to do is just say, if I could have a conversation, that's what I'm always thinking now, is if I could have a conversation with them, and if I yell at them, like people yelled at me, is that ever going to change them? If I call them murderers or zealots or whatever, am I just going to blend into a whole one giant voice? Or if I go, okay, tell me why you think Christians should be killed. Tell me why you think these people should, look, let's sit down and have this conversation, because I really believe that people want to be heard. I believe people want to discuss things. And there's people I've had great conversations with and they've never changed. And there's people who I've had conversations with and seen them change. And I'm often very impressed with just the fact that they were able to have conversations, because I've had a lot more people not willing to have conversations.
Yeah.
But I believe we're all so complex. I believe in, that we're all, as Hegel says, we all have a contradiction built within us, and that we can only recognize it and we cannot change it. I mean, we might be able to lighten it, but we can't change it. And I firmly believe that. And I believe when we come together, even in conflict as one-on-one, there's a recognition of one another's humanity, whether we know it or not. Unconsciously, I think we know it, but what it takes to get there is not easy. Might have to go to see a psychoanalyst to understand that. But I believe we do recognize each other's humanity in that kind of way. And think about the thoughts if you've ever been yelled at by a street preacher and you got in an argument, you got really angry, and you said something dumb. And then later you're in the shower, you're having the argument in your head. I mean, for me, that was always something like, I wonder if that guy feels this. I mean, all of a sudden, I wonder if I'm also considering, is he a human being too?
Yeah.
And so there's something very powerful in that. I did a talk a few weeks ago which was where I was really plugging you. And I think it was like, be a badass, don't be an ass. And talking about deconstruction.
Which one was I?
Definitely the ass. No, I like you because you do sometimes, even for me, I go,
I'm both.
No, but that's fantastic. But the idea is how do we go from being like returning the preacher who says something shitty to us because we're asking questions. And then when we ask a question, do we say something shitty back? Or do we go, let me think about that? And I'm like, how do we go from that there to that? And that's why I like, go talk to Phil. He'll love you, no matter if you're an ass or a badass. But if we're really wanting to move forward, how do we make space to actually have conversations with these people so maybe we can lead them to where we're at? And, I know I sound like I'm like I want the impossible to happen, but I do believe that there's a community here, and that with people like you and people like Pete Rollins, people like Todd McGowan, different people I respect, I can hand them books, or I can hand them an address or Instagram handle and say, let's check this out. And that we can become, this is this really, we can just live well and learn to eventually, what's really great is when you learn just, you don't really give a damn. You know what I mean? Like, I give a damn when it's my work, but like when we get off of here, I'm going, whatever. Life goes on. I'm living life, clean up the house. Kids are coming on Thursday, whatever, you know what I mean? And just, you kind of learn to just kind of let it go. Yeah. And there's something really fantastic about that too. But that takes a while too. I mean, I've been through a lot of therapy, which I can't recommend enough. Is very good therapy. Don't recommend Christian therapy at all, to be honest with you. It's okay if they're a Christian, but not a Christian therapy group would be my advice, is find a therapist. And while you're going through this type of thing, especially deconstruction, because it can just be extremely lonely.
It's a lot to process on your own.
Yeah, so much. And especially like if you are going to the church where there's 50 people in the rural South, and you're asking these questions, and now you're just like, damn, what do I do?
Yeah.
I mean, thank God.
Every sermon you hear, every conversation you hear is a subtle kind of almost gaslighting, invalidating your personal experience, because no one else is having that experience, right? So your experience isn't real to them. And so whether the intention is there or not, you're hearing in your head constantly, what you're going through isn't valid. Those thoughts are just lies or not real, or, that's go see therapists.
Or someone throws out like the book of James, like, don't doubt, because you're wave, like, you go, oh no, and I'm like, okay, with deconstruction, we have to look at the whole book together. Like, we can talk about James, and James has got some fucking issues. If you don't realize the issues that Paul was having with Peter was all because James' people came in, and Peter was so afraid of James's people that he wouldn't sit with Gentiles. Like, when you're able to kind of even show people like that.
Yeah. Like the perfect early church, right? That we all want to go back to.
Even the Rock, Peter was afraid of James. So there's an issue here. Let's see what this issue is. Maybe this isn't the guy to go to right now. And how do you read the Bible? Funny. It's like, you had Rob Bell on, and he shows us that it's a collection of books and different things like that. And so is, people who've studied it do start to realize that, and you are able to kind of take it more with a grain of salt. But there's a lot of, I don't know even what I'm saying anymore, but there's a lot of freedom in that. So
yeah, no, it's absolutely huge. Like it's a painful, crazy, wild process to go through. And you don't even need other people to be throwing James in your face, right? You've read James all your life. You've heard it all your life. You are sitting there lying in your bed, trying to get to sleep, thinking, I'm just tossing to and fro like waves right now. I am the doubter. What if I am lukewarm? What if Jesus spits me out? Like, you don't need anyone, telling you you're invalid or you're evil or you're backsliding. You think it because you've heard this again and again. And you don't even need to think, oh, what will my pastor think? Because you heard him talk about the last guy that did this, right? The difference is you were there lynching the last guy as well.
Right. You were agreeing with them because you were scared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Usually. And I mean, I remember when I was doing a book and it called Faith and Doubt. And I remembered that James it was almost like James was whispering into my ear when I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do Faith and Doubt. And I was like, God damn, I'm going to have to write about that, and great, that's even worse because I had to confront him. Luckily he was dead and couldn't talk back, but yeah, confronting James is an interesting thing. Clarifying James is even more interesting, I think, but it's easy to speak for the dead.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it kind of jumps back to what you were saying earlier about your engaging with the Bible, but it is fascinating that so many people, as they deconstruct, they do remain quite literal and legalistic about their faith. That they're grappling with the fact that their legalism and their literalism, especially the literalism, it's not allowing them to love to the degree that they want to or need to, or be as inclusive or whatever it is. Or it's maybe causing some bad fruit, some fear, some shame or whatever. And so they're going, I don't like this, but they then have to approach the Bible and go, right, so how do I read this? And so if I can just find the right context, a bit of structure from history, or maybe find out, oh, Peter and James and John were all having this big fight and, or whatever, Paul comes in and he disagrees as well. And like, oh, now I feel permission to read this literally, but I can go, well, when it said that in this context, now I feel safe. But what's fascinating is, like you said, and I know like a lot of people listening to this are still in that place, but like you said, a lot of people get to the point where like, gosh, I don't really care anymore anyway. If you ask me, what's interesting is you then find the people that are starting that process and they're going, how do you read the Bible like this? And my first thought is like, I don't really care how I would read it to make it say that, but you need it to say that. Like, there's a need for you. Again, it goes back to this kind of stage thing where you go, oh, you're at a stage where if I respond, I don't read it like that. Who cares what it says? It's in Timothy. That's just bullshit, or whatever, right? They're going to run. They're going to run. And you're going to be like, oh, I missed the opportunity to help them on their journey. I need to go, oh, well, actually, let's look at some context for Timothy. Let's look at how it could be read. Maybe this passage about women could be read this way. You don't say, it's probably written 200 years later by someone that just pretended to be Paul to try and put women in their place, because a lot of Paul said was very pro-woman. Maybe just don't read it. That's not the approach that most conservative, early deconstructing Christians are going to want to hear. It's fascinating to me, that process.
Well, Yeah. I sometimes give books to people that I read earlier on, where I was like, I was there. Okay, read this book. It's a book that I don't necessarily agree with, but I know that it's a good jumping point. I mean, I remember reading books 15 years ago that I thought were complete heresy, and now I read them today and think they're like too orthodox,
That's so funny. Yeah. Well, people ask me, why do I keep up my old podcast, and why do I sell my I have a little devotional book, and they're like, why do you sell that? And I'm like, I don't believe it, but if anyone asks me, I'd tell you it's not, I wouldn't believe it. But if you read the blurb and you thought that sounds great, it's for you. 100%. Right, You're going to love it. If you think, a 30-day devotional about different theological topics, and you think, I'd like that, you will like it. Right? Yeah. But if you're thinking, the Bible, why is Phil writing about the Bible? Don't buy the book. Right? But it's funny because I'm like, well, they will, like someone is going to be at the place where that was helpful, because it was helpful for me at some point, right? And I think there's so much value in, again, this just comes down to being nuanced, right? Not these black and white, in, out. Because the thing is, if you have that look, well, at what point are you in right now, right? Not 3 weeks ago, not 2 years ago, not 5 years ago. So are you going to be in 3 weeks from now when you change something? Right? It's a disaster. And you teach people to be where you are right now, and they get there, but by the time they get there, you've moved on and they're still in the wrong place. It's just, it's a very flawed system in a lot of ways, this kind of in-out approach.
It really
to faith.
is. I mean, there doesn't need to be an in or out approach. I mean, that's what I love about the 12 steps is that, you know, how it brings just every level of person together. You know, I mean, I've been in AA meetings where drunk people have been sitting next to me, you know what I mean? And so I was like that. And I love now that I'm in at Revolution, at least when we last met, which has been March, I guess, March or April, where we, you know, having people who are like, oh no, I'm a total atheist, you know, and what do you think about that? And I'm like, I think I'd like to have you speak in the next couple of weeks and tell people how you got out of your faith and survived. What? Yeah, no, I want you to talk about that. And that's stuff we do at our church. I mean, there's some people who just don't believe, and what I'm going to say isn't going to change their minds, you know, and what I believe for a lot of people, if I sat down, would maybe cause them to not believe in God anymore or think I'm a heretic or, you know, whatever, go another way. But just not being like, I'm not the end all, you know, my voice isn't the end all. That's why we have, afterwards, it's just part of the service now. We called it Afterglow as a joke, but everybody has questions at the end of the service. And if you're listening online, you can type them in and live, and we just go with pushback or, you know, compliments or whatever we get. You know, we deal with it in those moments. And
you don't have your yes guy deleting the other comments, the questions that you don't like.
I'm going to hire one of those soon. No, but yeah, no, it's good. It's been great. It's just making this atmosphere where everybody can push back and ask questions, and
it's beautiful.
You know, because we're all in different places, and maybe that's the problem with organized religion. You know, and I've always jokingly called Revolution unorganized religion, you know, is that everybody's at different places, and I'm not here to save anybody. You know, if they want to get out of Christianity, you know, I'm going to stick with them through that journey. Yeah. And, because who knows what they have for them, but you know, everywhere I was raised, I mean, I can feel it in my bones when I say that, like, that's not right. You know what I mean? Like there's that old part of me that is like, what are you doing? You know, but I'm just, you know, trying to love people the best of my ability. I mean, I remember because you were talking about, like, you know, how do I do this when the Bible says this or this and this? And I remember in my early 20s sitting with a pastor friend of mine and asking him, like, have we been tricked? Like, did Jesus pull a trick by, like, letting all these other guys take part in the Bible? You know, like, if we listen to them, we're not listening to him. You know what I mean? It's like some sort of weird puzzle, like some sort of test we're supposed to pass. Like, you know,
everyone has failed.
Yeah. Like if I tell what Paul or James told me to do, then I'm not loving the way Jesus did. Or if I actually if I treated someone like Jesus did there, then I'm not doing what Paul said over here. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is real, you know, and if love is the ultimate goal, then, you know, I can't go to half of these places anymore. You know, and, you know, also trying not to do, you know, gymnastics anymore. And just, you know, I'm really getting into philosophy, and I kind of hope that that's where the future of my career goes is a lot more philosophy, a lot more Hegel, and keep Jesus and Paul around, because I really dig those guys, you know.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome. Talk to me about, so this is interesting. I've had a few pastors on, I mean, I've had a lot of pastors on that have deconstructed, and many of them have blown up their churches and it's gone terrible for them. Many have blown up their churches and it's gone fantastic for them. Many have split their churches and they've held on to some of them. And others still have managed to kind of like bring their churches with them. And it depends on the type of person, their desires, their goals, how they've processed, what kind of pain they've been through, and things like that. There's all sorts of different things. But one of the things that I'm constantly fascinated with, and I love talking to people that are still running some form of church or community, some gathering, is, you know, church is hard anyway. Running even just a conventional, you know, generic, doesn't matter, Lutheran, AOG, Baptist, running a church is hard. I've been a part of a Baptist church. My dad's Baptist church growing up. I've been a part of multiple other denominations growing up and through life. It's hard. I've talked to hundreds of pastors. It's very difficult. Hard. But when you're pastoring people that are in radically different places, it's a whole nother level. It's like pastoring like herding cats, it's like, what are some, because I know a lot of people out there, maybe that not many people listen to this probably want to be a pastor, but a lot of people out there are maybe alone. Maybe there's a couple of them. They have a few friends that are deconstructing with them. But I know a lot of people are going, we want to build some sort of community together. Like, because there is something, whether you like it or not, church does community fantastically on the whole. Yeah. And it creates this community that loves one another, that's there for one another, that if you're sick, they'll bring you around lasagna to feed your family. They will visit you in the hospital. They will, they're just there. And they create friendship groups and social structures for things to happen. That is missed by a lot of people who can't do quote unquote church anymore. And many of these people are very aware that church isn't a building or an institution. Right. They get it's the people, but they don't have people either. What would you suggest to people are some of the keys that you found in developing community where people do believe differently? Because I guess my big question is, what I've found is that when you deconstruct, you are generally coming out of a world where we all gathered around believing the same thing. And so the default is, if I can just find some deconstructing Christians, we'll all believe the same thing. Right. Doesn't happen, right? No, they all believe radically different. So what do you do when half of them want to worship, but the others find worship horrendous and very triggering? Or what do you do when half of them want to pray, but the other ones are like, I don't even know what God is anymore. I don't know, who am I praying to? How have you kind of managed some of these kind of concepts and difficulties?
Well, I don't really pray anymore either, which is funny. And this is my way of trying to answer some of that question. But I've had people ask me to pray for them, and I pray for them. It just doesn't get me all, I'm not going to pray because I don't believe that works. Or let me give you why my theological reasons. No, okay, prayer is important to you. Let's do this. Let's have a prayer. Let's talk about it. It just doesn't, it's not going to bother me one way or the other. Learning to, when people come up and, like I said, I'm an atheist, and I think your whole message on loving your enemy is bullshit. What do you think about that? I'm like, well, okay, can you speak in a few weeks and tell us why? So we can have a conversation about it. Not being shocked by not shocked what people believe anymore or don't believe anymore or care what, unless they're going to hurt somebody or unless they're hurting some, but I do care when people start to hurt each other verbally or online or things like that. Those are things I will pay attention to, because I think it's dangerous, and we don't know where our enemies are in their own mental health and what they're dealing with. And mental illness is very, very real in the church today. But just being compassionate and loving. I mean, really, grace screwed me up, man. The verse, love God with all your heart, and equally as important, love your neighbor as yourself. And then, well, who's my neighbor? And then he goes and tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And then that's the guy's enemy, and I'm like, oh, so I have to love my enemies too. And just learning to love and forgive people. It was something my mom was always able to do. And even my dad did pretty well, was always didn't teach me. I kind of had to learn it over time, but they always told me to forgive people, and they felt that it was very important. And when I realized it was important, because I realized that the hate seemed to actually turn me into something worse. And caused me to develop other coping mechanisms to hide the hate or to deal with the hate, or if when I released the hate, it wouldn't release right. You know what I mean? And to forgive them, then all of a sudden I could be like, you know what? I really disagree with this, and I don't hate you. You did this and it really hurt me, but it's not a reason for us to hate each other. And something happened there. But I honestly tell you, it's a difficult place when you get to a point where you're loving other people's enemies, because they'll sometimes be hurt because you're like, hey, you're my friend. How can you love this person?
Right. Yeah.
And you go like, well, I'm not trying to be their best friend. I'm just trying to find out why they hurt you the way they did. Yeah. And I'm trying to give them the grace that they refuse to give you. You know what I mean? I'm hoping that they'll see the errors of their way in the same way. And I'm saying all this is basically is like, you have to meet each person as an individual. That's how you have a diverse community is, everybody, you meet their needs where certain people's needs are. The problem is the church wants to prescribe one need to every person, or like, okay, well, this part needs this and this part needs that. For me, it's all about the individual. Now, having a church online, I don't always know what that individual need is. So I just have to say, hey, if you don't like it, you don't like it. If you do, you do, but if you really upset you, or it really, let me know right now why I'm talking, or go to Instagram, because I love Instagram, send me a message, DM me, we'll talk about it. But it is trying to deal with people individually. Like I had a guy go off on me the other day online, and I called him, and we talked on the phone for like an hour, and it was a really horrific first 30 minutes conversation. Like we were both just pissed. You know what I mean? It was like we were just like in a piss fight, basically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like, what are you guys doing? And we got around to it, and it got better at the end, but it was really, really, really tough and really, really uncomfortable. So I think when we learn to kind of respect people individually, not to scapegoat whole groups, not all conservatives are evil. I'm sorry. It's just true.
Yeah.
Most people who are in ministry aren't on TV, and they're probably not awful people. They're doing the best with what they've got. And you might be the person who's able to give them something else, but it's just, I don't know. I've been lucky enough to like Pete Rollins's books helped me a lot, to be honest with you. Like reading Martin Luther King was really amazing and changed a lot of ways what I dealt with people. But then I read a lot of Pete's books and they kind of put to words to some of the things that I was feeling. He's a very, he'll take you on a deconstruction tour. That's not a lot of fun. Trust me. I've been through it with him as a best friend, but there's something about not shitting on people, not scapegoating people, and not hurting other people, and not even hurting those who are hurting you, and not returning the favor. And, this whole idea of like do unto others you'd have them do to you, and treat your neighbor how you'd want to be treated. Those are a few things that I do take to heart, and I've really tried to implement in my work, and it really helps. Now, are there times there's somebody I'll see and I just want to punch them? Yes. I mean, there's this guy who's a worship leader, and he keeps doing these worship things in front of like with large crowds right now. And honestly, I would, I wouldn't mind debating him publicly. That would probably be the best first thing. But there's a part of me that's like,
love to have him on my show.
Oh God,
but
he won't do it.
I don't think I do. Yeah, I think most people do. So,
and then there's a part of me where I wouldn't mind punching the guy in the face. And I believe in nonviolence. I believe in grace and all that stuff. But I'm also a human being where you just go like, So I'm not perfect at this by any means, but also helping people when they come into a space of deconstruction where all people are different and you're building a community of different. I think it's also important to make it clear is that this is not a safe space, not at least the way most generally people put it, because there are going to be people who say things that make you angry and that are going to trigger you. And I'm not going to be able to give you a warning every time. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I don't know if there's a church in the world that's honestly a safe place. Right. So, if you want to create a safe space, don't do a church. Create a club where there's these type of people, but the church isn't it. It's just not safe. I mean, it's historically never been a safe place. And and when you bring people together who have different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, different ideas, you just have to train people. You don't really train people, but to help people understand how to deal with conflict. Yeah, and that becomes really important. Do you have thoughts I can say all this gives me better.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on the progressive church? Because I feel like the progressive church is quite a fascinating movement, and obviously that phrase kind of encapsulates quite a lot of different kind of groupings of church. But to me, I think of like, what's a safe space for a lot of people that are even using that phrase would probably find somewhere like the progressive church a fairly safe place. But it's because it is very black and white and fundamental and very dualistic. So it's just a very different type of fundamentalism. Yeah. Where we're not going to allow a non-affirming person to speak or to, particularly, and they're going to feel uncomfortable in that environment, much like a gay person has felt uncomfortable in the Baptist church. And so in the same way that most kind of very traditional is maybe the wrong word, but conservative, conventional, black and white Americans would feel very safe in a Baptist church, right? As long as they were maybe like white, cis, straight, or whatever there's qualifications to that. But on the flip side, a trans person, a gay person, a extremely liberal political person is probably going to feel fairly safe in a church run by Shane Claiborne or Brian McLaren or kind of these progressive voices. Do you have thoughts on that movement? Do you have an idea? Because I know a lot of people at Deconstruct find that very helpful.
I came out of the emergent movement.
Yeah.
That was a big thing that embraced me during the grace times, the grace years, or, you know, during some tough years. And I kind of came in, and then we all kind of like just dissolved and disappeared. It was a very cool thing to be a part of. Ironically, I think it was probably the progressives who caused us to disintegrate. Right. And I worry about the progressives because I do feel like they're the new fundamentalists in a way. There's a lot of, you know, you have to think this way. You have to vote this way. There's a lot of scapegoating going on, saying, well, if we just got rid of these people. And what bothers me is in some ways, they are starting to become exactly what they hate and exactly what they said we don't want. And, you know, now the guy whose parents voted for Trump is being told that he needs to leave his family, rather than the guy who's gay told, you know, his parents saying, you need to leave your son. Do you see what I'm saying? Right. It's like, it's a very similar dynamic. And to me, it's just another form of heresy. And really, I mean, it's not the whole progressive movement, but it really is starting to get out of hand. And I shut my Facebook down, not because of conservative Christians. I mean, and I went through a time where, you know, Mark Driscoll was huge, and I had all these neo-Calvinists coming after me left and right, you know, and these guys don't just get pissed at you. They start podcasts, and they would play clips of me and then talk about me, clips. And
dude, they Mark Driscoll you. He made that famous.
No. And I was like, holy shit, you know, this is awful. I had no idea I was going to be analyzed. And did I say that? But yeah, so are you still there? Yeah. So,
I am,
yeah, sorry. And, but no, what was I saying?
You said kind of progressive new fundamentals.
My Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of people who are progressive because I put up a quote from Sean Lennon saying that all conservatives aren't Nazis and all liberals, and he used, I think, aren't libtards, which is very unpolitically correct to say, but those are what he said. And the liberals came after me for it. And a lot of it had nothing, you know, a couple of people had the libtard thing was a problem for them, but a lot of it had to do with, no, all conservatives are this way, or this is, you know, and how in that black and white dualistic thinking. And I shut my Facebook down. I just was done. I mean, I have that. It was the most number of people I have on social media was on my Facebook. I make a living online right now. And in the midst of all this, I just shut it down. I was done. You know, I was done because they were so hurtful. They were so mean. They were so cruel that in some ways they made evangelicals look kinder and gentler. And so I'm really, really worried. I'm really worried. I don't call myself, I cannot in good conscience call myself a progressive anymore, you know? And I'm a lifelong liberal. Very open. All my stuff's left leaning. I've done, you know, a few years ago, most of my work was just based on LGBTQ rights and equality in the church. Always trying to get people to think, but I think this whole dualistic thinking is just completely dangerous. The other day I was on Twitter and saw somebody said that some of the progressive churches are starting to, they said that one of the churches they were at started complaining about all the ex-evangelicals that were showing up. And then they kept talking about ex-evangelicalism. And when you're in a church and someone's got the wrong kind of wounds, there's a problem. You know, because you're like a hospital that says, oh, no, we don't do knife wounds. We only do gun wounds. So you're going to have to go down the street to get the knife wound taken care of. You know, the church isn't supposed to be a courtroom. You know, I mean, the church is, biblically at least, supposed to be seen as more of a hospital than a courtroom. And so for me, I'm really worried about it. You know, I don't talk that. I try not to talk that much about it on Sundays because I don't want to alienate all my progressive friends. Yeah, but I am worried about it, and I also think that's another reason why I keep pushing this arguing well. And I think with even maybe why I push back on you a little bit too with some of those little things is like, you know, you're drawing in the progressives to continue that same mind thought. Well, now I'm progressive and I'm going to deconstruct everything, and these people are bad. And I don't want. No. Don't trade this one certainty for the other certainty. Don't trade one legalism for another type of legalism. What you want to, like, if you want to really deconstruct and reform anything in your life, you want to get rid of that legalism. Like, get rid of that, because that legalism is going to destroy your life. You know, and if you want people to be happy, you know, getting rid of legalism on either side is I would say is the first thing to do is
Yeah.
let that shit go. Cause it will destroy you and alienate you. And it won't only destroy you, it'll destroy potential friendships, family relationships. I mean, between me and my dad is very conservative, and I don't believe in scapegoating. I don't, and all this. And our conversations are still very difficult. Like I'm like, Dad, I don't think all Republicans are bad. I don't think all this, blah, blah, blah. But we still have tough conversations. It's still not easy. So I couldn't imagine if it was like, well, you're a Nazi. You're like a Nazi, and I'm going to write you off. We'd have, what that would be like. It would be a living nightmare. But I don't have the luxury of doing that because also I might be the only critical thinker that my dad has in his ear right now, so.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have as much of a choice for you. He has to have a conversation with you, right? I mean, he doesn't have to. He could completely cut you off or whatever, and you could cut him off. But yeah. I'm intrigued. So in observing this kind of transition, I've made some observations, and they may or may not be right, and I would be intrigued just because you clearly think a lot about this. You spend a lot of time studying, trying to engage in this way. You've got a lot of very smart friends. People like Pete Rollins. I need to have Pete Rollins on here. I keep forgetting to ask. I'm like, I have to have him on. I love Pete Rollins. If people are listening to this and they aren't following Pete Rollins and reading his stuff, you have to do it. He's just incredible. I guess something I have observed is that it feels like, because I'm very much about finding this third path, this third way. It's not your left, it's not right. Maybe we could find somewhere in the middle. It's not black, it's not white. Could we maybe explore some of this gray? It feels like a lot of people, after they have been black and they need to find some gray, they can't do it until they swing to the white. It feels like there's almost this need of, in the dualism, they have to have a fundamental swing to the other side to realize its futility. Do you think there's a truth to that on some level that, some conservative Christians have to go into progressive Christianity as they kind of deconstruct their conservatism, and they realize, well, maybe it's not about, whatever it is that the conservative branch is pushing. Maybe it's this progressive thing, and then it's only in finding and pushing that to its end that they go, oh, it wasn't this either. I don't know. I sometimes wonder, because I just find myself trying to reach people with a third way who have come out of one way and not really overly gone into the second way yet, often just falls flat on its face. People aren't able to engage with that kind of thinking, it feels.
No, I mean,
maybe I'm not very good at convincing people. I don't know. But,
but I would say the majority do that. I'd say I know a lot of them just stick once they get to the progressive church. They just stick there because the scapegoating is doesn't seem as hateful, I think. And honestly, probably not, to be honest.
In a lot of ways, at least it's a little bit more inclusive, but there's less people being excluded, but and everybody's different. Every church is different. Right. But I think a lot more people from the right are going to come into the whole, like, I want to deconstruct. And part of the deconstruction is going through that progressive church. But some of them just leave it and don't come back. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, for me, it was the same way. I was like, forget the conservative church. And then I went into more of the emergent church, which seemed to have be this strange, I don't want to say it was gray, because there was things where we were like, well, we don't have to have answers and there's probably no hell. You know what I mean? Like, we were very out there, but for some reason we weren't enough. Like, we didn't seem inclusive enough, but everybody was assigning us, like, if like Brian McLaren sold the most books, so he must be the leader of the emergent church. Fact is, there was no leader. If we would have existed another year, then Nadia Bolz-Weber would have been the leader of because she sold the most books. I mean, it wasn't there. Well, there's not everyone wants a figurehead, whatever.
Or there wasn't enough diversity in the emergent church. But I was like, well, people don't realize is in the African American church, a lot of them have gone and asked these questions and already done this. You know what I mean? We're it just wasn't. There wasn't. It's more like this freedom, not freedom theology. What's the word I'm looking for?
Liberation.
Liberation theology.
Yeah, a lot of the black church has deconstructed and remained as the church, or at least deconstructed. A lot of their theology has been deconstructed.
And a lot of these white white churches that these guys are coming out are mainline or evangelical. And that's, so we were all kind of rebelling against this really mostly white church system that wouldn't allow us to ask these questions.
Right.
So I don't think I ever went completely to the progressive church. But yeah, but it is interesting, but I did have to go to something that was not what I had been to before. And I think the third way is like, what is the third way? I did a podcast earlier today and we were talking about the film Star Wars. And I talked about Luke Skywalker and how, he's got the Jedi saying, you've got to kill Darth Vader, not telling him that it's his father. He has to find that out from Darth Vader. Probably a good call if they want him to kill him. Yeah. And so he's like, this is my father. I can't kill my father. And then like, well, then we lose if you don't kill him, and he goes and he meets him and he fights him. But at the end, one of the scenes that always was really powerful to me is right before he talks to Darth Vader, his dad, he's dragging him through the Death Star. This huge machine he's dragging, and he's it's Mark Hamill. He's not a big guy. And he's dragging him to save him. Like he's going to be like, screw, I don't care what the Jedi told me. I'm going to save him, and I'm not going to join the dark side either. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to bring my dad and we're going to work together and this is going to be great, And to me, I was like, well, maybe that's the third way, to the point where then I was talking about the sequels. Like, I'm like, they couldn't even bring Darth Vader because then Darth Vader is like, you've saved me, son. You've done this, And then the idea that Darth Vader gets grace is completely unfair. Doesn't make any sense. And that's what, to me, real grace is. And then, so in a way, it's almost like Luke Skywalker in this journey takes the third way. And I thought it was interesting is that they didn't really know what to do with these in the sequels. They didn't know what to do with this gray. So they just make Mark Hamill, make Luke Skywalker kind of this bitter guy. And we're just going to show Darth Vader's helmet because we don't know what to do with this guy who got completely like okayed. We're not going to even show his ghost. We're not going to do that. Even just George Lucas didn't know what to do with it. So he sold it, and then the financial juggernaut, Disney, doesn't know what to do with it. And so I think there's a third way, and I know using Star Wars is an odd sense, but when you're getting messages from both sides that no, you have to do it this way, and no, you have to do it this way, and then you go, no, I'm going to do it this way because there's something I feel. He kept saying like, I feel good in him. It's like, who cares if you feel good in him? He killed like 20 kids at the Jedi Council. You can't do it, Yeah. But he does it anyway. And so I think there's a third way, but I think the third way is extremely difficult. Yeah. And maybe you do end up a hermit on an island somewhere that, doesn't care about the Force anymore. But the point is, I believe there's a third way. I think Peter Rollins is doing a third way. I think there's a lot of philosophers doing that, and they are lucky because they have philosophy. And I think philosophy can be almost impenetrable. Yeah. And so and it's been really tough for me, but reading people who know about philosophy and having it has really helped me a lot to want to live life well and live in this way where my dad is important to me. Martin Luther King is important to me. Women's rights are important to me. LGBTQ people are important to me, but it's also important to me that you don't write off every conservative because I know a few that'll give you the shirt off their back, and I feel like maybe that's how I got to I don't know if what I'm doing is a third way. I know it's not way A or B, and I don't know if it's even C, to be honest with you, but I think it's possible. I hope you don't have to go through both. I hope that maybe like conversations we're having right now as we're saying legalism here, legalism here. Okay, the church has got to get rid of legalism first before we can even have a conversation, because that legalism is me going like, no, you're going to hell. No, you're going to hell. Or, well, there is no hell. Or, no. And it's saying we have to take down these legalistic walls before we can even have a conversation. Yeah. So maybe that's the hope is that really that's the intolerance of humanity, the othering of humanity, the dualistic thinking is something that really needs to be taken down. And maybe if you've gone through both of those, you see that, and you realize that dualistic thinking doesn't make sense. But it's really tough right now for me to make a living not having because if I tweeted about Trump, not liking Trump and Trump being an asshole and conservatives, I could get 1,000 likes, but I can't do it, so instead I get like, oh, here's my sermon, 2 likes. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
What are you going to do? It's just, I think you have to be focused on a longer game.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to be focused on the long game, and what is the future going to hold, and how do we affect the future and be better human beings? Because it doesn't work in politics. It doesn't work in religion. All it does is continue to destroy one another and promise some sort of happiness if you get rid of this group or you get rid of this group. And that's basically capitalism. And it's just, saying you'll be happy if you only had this, or if you didn't have that. And the lack is always going to be there. And that object, the object of desire, will never bring you completeness. Where that object is getting rid of people or adding something to it. So, I mean, we have to learn to live life knowing that that lack is just going to be part of our lives. Does that make sense?
Big time. Really does. It makes me think of, I've only just in the last couple of weeks discovered that on Instagram, you can find out some insights about your following and your audience. And I'm like, oh, cool. Fascinating. Like 58% of my following are women, or, things like that. It's just like, I didn't know that. But one of the insights, you can break it down over the last 30 days, how many people liked you, unliked you, and what the net change was. So like, there's obviously like, oh, you got 50 new people today. And I'm like, whoa. And it's like, but you actually only got 20 new people because 30 people left, right? And you're like, what did I say? And you can see these like spikes and up and down, but like you see the huge spikes in the difference. So when it's like the difference shrinks down to like, like you actually grew by 0, but you gained 60 people in one day. And you're like, oh, but what's fascinating is I was looking at it, I was like, oh, there's a pattern. It literally spikes on the same day each week. And it's on Fridays. It's the days that I do my Q&A on Instagram.
Hilarious.
And it's the day where so basically my strategy really on just how I structure my week is I post funny memes and little quotes here and there throughout the week, mostly trying to like, that's what gets shared. That's what people see. They come and join my page and check me out. And then I post a couple of podcasts or YouTubes, but maybe like 10% of people watch that or listen. I'm sure it's not even that probably. And then on Wednesday, I do a Q&A and I answer 30, 40, 50. I mean, if people have looked at my stories, there's a lot of them, right? I mean, I just answer everything and there is a lot of questions.
It's insane. It's pretty great.
But my questions are never, ever giving clear answers. They're just, my answers are just terrible. They're just so wishy-washy. They're gray. They're uncertain because I know a lot of people are looking for that certainty and I won't give it to them. I won't feed that black and white dualism. I want to offer this third perspective, but it is the day that everyone leaves, and not everyone, of course. Actually, I'm seeing incredible growth and it's amazing. I'm just really blown away by that. It's really awesome, but it's the day where the growth dips each week. And I'm like, that's those fundamentals that go, God, that meme's funny. Look at him, ruining that conservative or that whatever, they've bought into that. And even if when I didn't plan it to be read that way, it got read that way or whatever, they were like, yes, this is good. But when I started to sit down and go, hey, there are no good and bad guys. And there's actually not necessarily even good and bad systems sometimes. It's just different systems for different seasons and different people at different stages. People are like, whoa. Don't you take my enemy from me. Don't you take the second way. I agree the first way is wrong, but don't you tell me that the second way is going to fail me too. Like that's, we don't want to hear it.
You've taken answers away from me before. You don't know that, but like things that I had as answers. And then I read something you said and I'm like, damn it. He's right. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
But the first moment I was like,
it's natural, right? Because we want to feel safe and we want to feel like we have meaning and we have managed to structure a bit of life and go, okay, cool. I know what way is up and I know what way is down. And we need those dualisms, right? I need to know if I jump out the window, I'll go down and I probably shouldn't. And I need to know if I don't know, stand up, my feet will be there. If I sit on this chair will hold me. I'm like, these are all dualisms, they're rooted in these kind of very legal, like laws of nature, that makes us feel safe. We need some of that. But it's amazing that the provoking it does in us. And I do it. Some of these, what you don't see, right, is some of these answers, I've typed out 2 answers and then gone, no, it's too dualistic. Oh, that's just, and, oh, Phil, that's your opinion. And you're probably right, but I don't give that. at least if you do present it, present some other options as well to make it less black and white. And so I'm constantly seeing that in myself. And I think it is why I'm always wondering, do we need to flip-flop a bit before we kind of settle in the middle? Do we need to have a pendulum swing that slowly settles somewhere in the middle bit by bit as it swings less and less and less over time? I don't know. I really don't.
And
but it feels like
I don't think
some of us do
to have that. Yeah, I don't think there's a wrong or right answer to that. I don't think there's a dualistic answer to the need for dualism. For that situation. It's funny. Like I've saved when on Twitter, like I used to be a Twitter warrior, and sometimes I'll fall back into that, and I'll just, it's canceled, and I ask you if you want to save it. So I was
you want to discard this? No, I'll post that later.
Yeah, so maybe I'll post it later, and then I go back and read it. And I'm like, holy crap! One, this is the worst place I could say that because it's going to be completely misconstrued. And sometimes they become sermons, but they only can be sermons because they need to be 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Right.
You need to add all the nuance into it.
Right. So it is really interesting how that works. And you come up with the perfect response, or like I have 5 different responses, then I cut it down, redo it, send it to somebody. What do you think about this? And then I put it up, I guess that's being obsessive compulsive sometimes about a tweet, but
well, it's probably a safe way to tweet. That's for sure. Yeah. I don't use Twitter for the reason that I'm just
tweeting
way too I get riled up too soon, and it's a much faster pace than like all the other social platforms. I'm just I was on
Instagram the other night, and I was writing a comment to this guy who's doing this thing from Skillet, and he's like, "Make preachers uncool again." And I read his thing, and I was like, "Oh, I had this huge critique," and I'm writing it out and typing it out and put it up for about 10 minutes. And I go back and I'm like, oh God, I got to go back. Delete. You know what I mean? It was like just one of those things like, this isn't my war anymore. This isn't this isn't even my world, and I just don't need to, this isn't where I need to have my 2 cents delivered,
Yep.
Or at least not this way. So yeah, it's funny though. Yeah. You watch this I got 50 new followers, but I had 150 people leave. Like, am I boring them? Do I need more excitement? Like whenever I talk about like my depression or like my attempted suicide or something like that, it's like 500 likes, you know what I mean? But I'm like, hey, I just did this awesome talk. It's like 8 likes, you're like, damn it. I got to talk more about dark, depressing stuff.
Yeah. It's like, I don't want to have more depression to talk about.
Yeah.
That's so funny, isn't it? It's true, isn't it? It's amazing how the things that we sometimes are most passionate about as well, it's just not where, like, I look at my Facebook audience, it's not where they're at anymore. So I live on Instagram, and my Instagram gets posted automatically to Facebook, but I don't even go on there and look really. I look about maybe every 3 or 4 days. But that audience is much older as well. And so they were tracking with me when I was a lot more fundamental. I was one of the grace guys, like whatever that meant. But it was still a very fundamental approach in a lot of ways, that grace movement. It was fighting legalism. It was, it was pointing out all the flaws in, Christianity and how you should really do Christianity, right? It's still very fundamental. We finally got the right way to do it or whatever. Yeah. And so they do not like a lot of the deconstruction stuff, some of them. And so it's that thing of like, you're realizing, as I go back to my Facebook, I'm just like, oh, these just aren't my people anymore. And actually, this is probably upsetting them. I'm going to post it next week and just say, look, this is where I'm at now. Like, this is what I'm about. These are the people I'm working with. There's great value in working with those people. If you're not those people, I really recommend you walk away. This is going to cause you stress, strain, get you upset. And I think there's just real value in realizing, oh, this is where my audience is. And you know what? It might be the 50 people that wanted to listen to the depression talk and not the 150 that wanted to listen, or not the 10 people that wanted to listen to this talk. And it's like, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. Like, there's other people can talk to them about this. It's right back at the beginning, what you were saying, it's like people come to your church and like, not for me or whatever. And you're like, great. What is for you? Let's find out what's for you. And like, that's a beautiful way to live. That's a beautiful, what a burden to take off your own shoulders to try and please everyone. Like, which is the burden of most pastors.
And I found that, honestly, it's something I don't talk a lot about, but I really do believe people pleasing is probably what destroyed both of my marriages. And I don't really talk about that at all. It's very, very raw. and very painful. But I think people pleasing is horrifically dangerous, and it can destroy families. It can destroy people you care about, and it destroys the person who's doing it. And it comes out of such a genuine spirit to want to really please people, to make them happy and feel good. But it's horrifically toxic. And so I always encourage people allow as much as I can is don't get into that trying to be a people pleaser thing. Learn to say no. As hard as it is hard. I know it is hard, but learn to say no, learn to have boundaries, and learn to be who you really are. And I think that's what's important with this about deconstruction is you are learning who you are and what you believe and what you think, and having the freedom to be comfortable in that is pretty awesome. And then when you don't want to be a people pleaser, you're able to say, well, I don't really believe that. And it might make some people angry, and you're like, that's okay. And it's also knowing, like, I can't go on a fundamentalist Instagram and make a comment because that's not my world anymore. Now, a fundamentalist might come after me and yell at me, and then I'll find 6 months down the line that they love me because something got through to them through that. I've seen that happen millions of times.
Sure,
times, but at least 100 times in my own work. Yeah. And, so you never know what's going to happen and what's, how people are going to react. But, but people pleasing I don't even think I'm at a point where I can articulate it well, because it's still kind of just a few years fresh of getting out of that. And I had to go through a lot of therapy to get out of that place. Well, I had to get into a really special place to learn that it was okay for people to be mad at me and to be upset with me. And that didn't change anything really. It didn't change who I was, didn't change who they were. But for some reason I made that a huge burden in my life. Yeah. And that's just not where you want to be. Yeah. And then when you start to enter into that, you will lose people that are close to you still, because there are people who liked the people pleasing you, and you'll realize that there's some people who respect you but don't like you anymore, but they have a respect for you. And then there's some people who just don't want to be your friend anymore because they liked the idea that you did everything you could to make them happy. So
they're teachers in the lesson, I guess. They're our first teachers.
It's really nasty and really painful.
Yeah. I mean, kind of working through any of our kind of major kind of these are dysfunctions. These are broken parts of us, right? It's basically the kid in me that wants mom to pay me enough attention, or, for my dad to go, son, you're amazing. Wow. And he just didn't do it as much. And so now as an adult, I'm looking for that. You're amazing. Wow. Or whatever. Right. And so how do I get it? Oh, I could run you to the shop and get your groceries with you. Or, oh, I could post another 4 times today. I know you like my posts or whatever. It can be the most silly things. But one of the things I found about people pleasing, because this is a big thing I had to deal with and I still deal with, there's no way I'm beyond this one, is I'm pleasing the idea I have in my head of what people want as well. Because the amount of times I'm talking to Till and I'm getting stressed. We're about to go out and I'm like, well, today's a podcast day. I haven't edited this podcast. I need to upload it. I need to get it done. I need to, then do the video. I need to get out. It's going to be at least 2 hours and we only have an hour and I'm getting stressed. And she's like, Phil, how many people listen to your podcast? I'm like, I don't know, 1,000 people. Probably not many, right? I mean, I don't know if that's a lot or not much, but it's probably about 1,000. It could be 10. It could be 5. I don't know. Could be one person. I don't know. But who cares, really? It's just a bunch of people. And she's like, will they listen to it tomorrow if it comes out? Why are they listening? Are they listening because it comes out on a Monday? And I'm like, no. Will they be disappointed? I'm like, well, maybe some of them are literally waiting. Maybe 3 people are going, oh, it's Monday. I can't wait for Phil to drop his podcast. I don't think I know many people that will be like that. Most of them are just going, oh, Phil's got a podcast. Cool. I'll check it out. And she's like, so who are you pleasing here? And I'm like, I'm pleasing this imaginary group of people that I have somehow built in my head are sitting there ready to angry message me. Where the fuck's the podcast? You bastard. You ruined my life. No one's ever sent me that message. Even when I have not posted, I dropped to 1 a week from 2 a week for the entire month of August. No one cared. Right? People were like, oh, it's cool. It gave me a break. I could catch up on the other ones I hadn't got. Or, and I'm like, oh, I have this whole imagination that I'm trying to please. This imaginary world with imaginary people. Even the people I know, like even right now, I'm talking to Jay Bakker. You're an imaginary person right now because I'm getting to know you more and I'm building more of a story about the person in front of me. But I'm still interacting with the story of the person on some level. Right.
We all
are. You're doing the same,
definitely.
Right?
Yes,
And so I'm trying to please this imaginary person, but I actually don't really know much about you, Jay. I wouldn't know what to get you for Christmas. I wouldn't know what day to release my podcast if you were going to listen to it. I don't know these things, but somehow I'll make some sort of story that I cripple myself with.
Right.
And it's brutal. And we do it with even the closest people to us, right? I mean, I've been divorced, and I would say a part of that was probably very people pleasing, maybe even trying to please people that weren't my wife, caused me the people closest to me to then turn away. But then other times I'm trying to please my wife, but I don't really know how to please her because I'm not really connecting.
And you're like, I've got to please this person. I've got to please this person, and I've got to please her. Oh no, now what do? I've got 3 people I have to please.
I don't know how to please everyone.
Like how do I manipulate this? You know what I mean? It really is. For me, it's very similar to how I learned to deal with my dyslexia in school. You learn all these tricks to avoid reading or avoid doing this or avoid doing that. People pleasing became the same thing as like, oh, I learned how to avoid this conversation and I learned how to avoid to stop doing this or how to talk to this person, and what I did is I just became a life of compensation rather than a life of living, Wow. So I had to let go of those things.
Yeah.
And just say, this is who I am. I'm sorry if I have to let you down, and realizing that people aren't angry forever, So.
Yeah. And most of us get it. Most of us do this, right? The amount of times I've realized, I remember when I used to travel, when I first started traveling and going to these churches, I would stay in the pastor's homes or someone's home from the church, and you'd eat meals with the family, and then you'd you'd go to the service and you come back and it'd be 11 o'clock at night, and yet you're having to, talk to the host home. You get home at 11 and they want to talk to you for 2 hours, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you're like, oh, I'm going to go to bed. But then you're getting up at 8 in the morning for the next service and you're like, I'm going to kill myself. And I did that probably for about 1.5 years before I started having conversations with the host homes and saying, look, I would love to connect with you. I'm really keen to spend time with you, but I really need my sleep. I really need my me time. I know this is a really special event for you because there's just one guest speaker coming and staying in your house a year, but actually I stay in people's homes like 200 nights of the year and have these conversations every night. And it's really exhausting. So could we make sure we maybe make some time tomorrow, maybe after breakfast, before the service, we'll go get coffee and we'll hang out. That'd be really great. But I'm just going to head to bed straight after the service. Not one person has ever been upset by that. Everyone has gone, whoa, yeah, of course. I've never thought about it like that. Of course. Yeah. Quick, go to bed. And not only that, the next time I show up, they're like hosts to the next level. They're like, how can we want to protect you. This pastor said he wanted to spend time with you. We said over our dead bodies will he be spending time, and I'm like, oh wow, they got it. But most of us are human, right? If you can actually connect with people on that level, the people pleasing suddenly becomes this thing that actually people aren't even needing. They've just come to expect because we were willing to kill ourselves over it. But if it's all the costs, for your personality. They would be like, oh, okay. Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how my therapist used to just be like, stop it. You've got to just stop. I'm like, well, what about that? No. She's like, you've just got to stop. Like, this is not even a discussion anymore. What has it done to you? You've got to stop, and I just had to stop. And it was that simple, but what a great moment of humanity. Like, she went to college all these years to tell me, and university to tell me to stop.
That's it.
Just cut it out. I mean,
that's so funny.
It is humans do. I mean, they do understand. I've had similar things with contracts and things like that I've had to do over the years. Because it's easy to burn out on the road, man.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't get to talk as much as I used to. But I miss it.
Yeah, I miss being on the roads. I miss traveling. I mean, when you're doing conferences and churches, it's just easy to keep going and have an endless supply. But when you're speaking to smaller groups and people that are basically sitting on their own at home anyway, they don't have community anymore. Never mind, they would kill for a community. Never mind to have you come to it. Right. So I do occasionally travel like maybe 4 or 5 times a year, maybe a bit more locally. But like, I miss being on the roads. But I tell you what, I'm glad I'm not, because I have a thriving community here and I would miss that. And my wife would probably really miss that. Or she wouldn't be able to work at all. Or, if she came with me, or it's just, you just ebb and flow, right? You find the new groove, the new season, what works, what doesn't work. But yeah, dude, this has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate your vulnerability, your openness, your wisdom, your pushback. I love it all. Like, I think you're just one of the greatest people. Like, you just are so loving, so kind, so smart.
And I just realized, like, the only reason here's my people pleaser coming out of me. The only reason I really pushed back, but no, I mean, it's because I know what you're dealing with constantly. And going through, and I was like, well, he's obviously somebody who's going to handle this right now, probably because he's probably has to. And when you're going through deconstruction, it's just basically, I knew you could handle pushback, so that's why.
I welcome it. I really do. It's funny. I just had a talk with Joe Lumen. Are you familiar with Joe Lumen? She has some amazing stuff on race on Instagram. She's one of my favorite Instagram accounts, but she is not for the faint of heart. She is intense, like really intense, and calling out the church on race and talking about race and how it operates within the system of church. She is part of the Do Better Church movement, which is a really great movement as well.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
But anyway, I was talking with her and I was explaining to her this whole thing of like, I love when people like send me a message and say, hey dude, that tweet you said, or that Instagram you said, I found it a bit ableist, I'm disabled. And actually the way you phrased it was actually quite offensive and it hurt me. I love it. But it hits you, right? You feel your heart just hits your stomach. It just sinks. Yeah. And it's that weird thing of like, I hate it. I feel the shame rises up or whatever it is, right? And it could be, the reason I was saying to her is like, I can't wait for the day you do a post calling out me and just saying, hey, this is not how you do it. And this is not the way. And this is how I'd recommend. She's always just very generous in her approach and asking, hey, why'd you do it that way? Can you see that this would be hurtful to some people? And people just aren't able to have that conversation a lot of the time. And I'm like, I want to have that conversation, but I do not want to have that conversation, right? You're like, I don't want to be called out, but I love being, and I think that's maybe like me stepping 50% towards where I want to be. But I think, I really appreciate people like you because you are doing you're being brave. And I think the cost is high for someone like you as well, because like you said, you have a lot of people that are still maybe seeing the world in a little bit of a dualistic sense. And that costs. It costs me to speak out against that a bit. And I don't do it nearly as much as I'd like to, at least. So I really appreciate what you're doing. I really do.
Well, thanks, buddy.
Tell people, how can they connect with what you're doing? How can people track with Jay Bakker?
They can go to
like a big one, right?
Yeah, Instagram, Jay Bakker, JayBakker. I've got 2 Ks in my name. Revolutionchurch.com. Revolution Church on Facebook. Revolution Church 1994, I believe it is, on Twitter. And Revolution Church MN is what it is still on Instagram, because there's a Revolution Church that hasn't posted in like 4 years on Instagram. And we're trying to contact them to see if we can get the Instagram handle. So we could just be Revolution Church, which would be really awesome. But we don't know if that's going to happen yet. So, but yeah, Instagram's a big one. That's where I spend a lot of my time.
Sure.
And we'll connect people to the work and the church and books and, and they'll see pictures of me doing dumb stuff every now and then as well. So,
And your Revolution Church, like that's all online, right? Are you planning on doing anything up in Seattle at some point? Like kind of trying to connect people and gather people?
Yes, we're going to try to find a bar with some sort of theater in it where we can meet. And because that's what we did in New York and that's what we did in Minnesota. So, and that's actually what we did in Atlanta as well. So yeah, we're hoping to find a community place to really set up a community and hopefully downtown Seattle somewhere. Yeah.
There's a lot of cool places downtown Seattle. So I'm sure you'll have no problem finding somewhere.
Yeah. So hopefully by February, we'll be able to get out again and see what's going on.
Sweet. Let me know when you do, because I'll definitely let people know to check it out.
Okay.
For sure.
We'll do.
But yeah, I'll let you know when this goes live. I'll give you a bit of a heads up. That'll probably be I think it's going to be the week before Christmas. You're basically going to be my last one. I think you're episode 99, right before my special 100th episode, which I don't know what I'm doing.
Nice.
But yeah.
The 18th I'll be 45, so that'll be interesting.
Oh wow, birthday present for you then.
Yeah,
because I think it'll be the
Christmas.
17th. It'll probably be the Thursday. So yeah, we'll see.
Cool.
But yeah, dude, this was amazing. I really do. I so love and appreciate you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat so long.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. You appreciate your work, man. Keep it up.
All right, love you, man. Catch you later.
Love you. All right, bye bye.
Peace.